Welcome to the Microsoft Dynamics GP 2013 Field Service New Features. My name is Maria Shipley. I am a Support Escalation Engineer on the GP Application Support Team. Within this training, we are going to cover 14 new field service features. This will include the general areas within field service call management, contract administration, and returns management. We'll first begin in the general areas of field service. Lesson 1. Backordered quantity updated. When field service transactions have a backordered quantity, the backordered quantity field will now update in the item inquiry and item quantities maintenance windows. This allows you to verify what documents have backordered quantities on them. Let's see what this looks like in Microsoft Dynamics GP. There are two areas within field service that allow the quantity backordered field to be updated in the item inquiry and item quantities maintenance windows. The first of these is service call management. If you go to Transactions, Service Call Management, Service Calls, and I will pull up a transaction that I've already entered, and I'm going to go into the Parts window. And in the Parts window, I have entered my item number of 100 XLG for a quantity ordered of 1, and now you'll see that it has a quantity backordered of 1. And the other is depot management. I'm going to pull up an existing work order that I've already entered by going to Transactions, Depot Management, Work Order Entry Update, and I will enter in my number and pull up the transaction. Then I'm going to go to my parts line, and you'll notice that I have my previously entered item of 100 XLG, and that it has a quantity ordered of 1, and it shows a quantity backordered of 1 as well. Now to view the backordered quantity fields for those transactions, I need to go under the Inventory module, Inquiry, and Item. Here I'll pull up my 100 XLG that I just entered on those transactions, and now you'll see the quantity backordered is 2. The second window is under the Cards menu, Quantity Sites, and I'll pull up my 100 XLG here as well, and you'll see it also shows the quantity backordered of 2. Lesson 2. Allocations displayed in Item Allocation Inquiry window. When you enter in field service transactions, the allocated quantities from those transactions will now update the Item Allocation Inquiry window. In previous versions, the field service transactions did not display in the Item Allocation Inquiry window. Now let's take a look at these windows in Microsoft Dynamics GP. To see items that are currently allocated on field service transactions, we can go directly to the Item Allocation Inquiry window by going to Inquiry, Item Allocation, and I will pull up an item of 100 XLG that I had entered on previous transactions, click on Redisplay, and you'll notice at the bottom that it shows items allocated of 5. If I expand the lines, it'll show that I have a quantity allocated of 1 on a service call, I have 2 on a fulfillment order, and this is previous functionality for the fulfillment order, so that's not new to this window. I also have a quantity allocated of 1 on an RTV, and a quantity of 1 allocated on a work order. The second way to access the Item Allocation Inquiry window is under Inquiry, Item. I'll pull up my same item of 100 XLG, and on the right hand side you'll see the word allocated with a quantity of 5 to the right of that. If I drill back on the word allocated, it will show me those same transactions that I previously looked at with items allocated with a quantity of 5. The last way to look at the Item Allocation Inquiry window is under the Cards menu, Quantity Sites, which will bring you to the Item Quantities Maintenance window. I'll pull up my same item of 100 XLG. This looks similar to the Item Inquiry window, just a little bit different. On the right, you'll see the word allocated with a quantity of 5 again. If I drill back on the word allocated, we'll see the same transactions that we saw in the other two windows as well. Lesson 3. Honor discontinued item status. This enhancement will honor the sales order processing setup option, Allow Sale of Discontinued Items. It will inform users of a discontinued item and reveal the available quantity. I will now show you in Microsoft Dynamics GP on how you can honor those discontinued items. To allow the sale of discontinued items, we need to mark an option in Sales Order Processing Setup. If you go to Setup, Sales Order Processing, click on Options, and scroll all the way to the bottom, there is a checkbox for Allow Sale of Discontinued Items. This needs to be marked to allow any item that is marked with a discontinued item status to be sold. If you wanted to require a password for users that are entering any sales discontinued item, you would set that password here. Or if you wanted to restrict users to not enter any discontinued items, you'd unmark this checkbox. But for the sake of showing you the actual message that will pop up on these discontinued items, I'm going to keep the option marked. I'll now show you the message that appears if you've entered the sales discontinued item on a service call transaction. If you go under Transactions, Service Call Management, Service Calls, I'll pull up a previously entered service call, and if I go to the parts line, you'll notice I have an item called A100, and I have my site as warehouse. Right now I'm going to enter a quantity ordered of 11 and tap through. You'll notice here's my pop-up message to show that I have discontinued item quantity available, and I've entered 11, but it'll show my text site of warehouse only has 10 available. So all I'm allowed to enter on the transaction is quantity available to order of 10. So what I will need to do is actually update my quantity to 10, knowing that's all I have left on hand. And if I tab through the lines, it will then accept it and allow me to complete the transaction. Places that you will not see the pop-up window open are parts line on a service call generated during PM generation, on a parts line on a service call generated during ECO generation, or a kit that's also entered on a service call where one or more of the components are actually discontinued. So you'll not see them in those cases. Lesson 4. Equipment supersession posts. You may post a supersession and the system will automatically verify the serial number, item number, and customer combination. If the serial number, equipment number, and item number already exist in the equipment master for another customer, you'll receive the message, "This serial and item number already exists. Please try another combination." I'll show you what this looks like in Microsoft Dynamics GP. I'll show you the message that appears when trying to perform a supersession on a piece of equipment. If you go to Cards, Service Call Management, Equipment, we'll pull up my equipment number and my item. And if I go into supersessions, I'm going to try and change my new equipment number to serial 1 instead of serial A and click on Post. Notice the message appears, "This serial and item number combination already exists. Please try another combination." This will prevent you from actually changing my equipment number to the new equipment number. Lesson 5. Create equipment for manufacturing. A checkbox now appears in the Service Setup window to allow you to automatically create equipment records when you receive an item through a manufacturing order. The customer that is used on the piece of equipment that is created for manufacturing comes from Service Setup. This customer is called the Return Customer ID, and you must have the customer extensions created in Field Service. The equipment record will verify to see if any equipment item number combination already exists prior to the creation of the new equipment record. It checks against the item number, serial number, and customer ID. When you post the MO receipt successfully, the equipment record will be created if it does not already exist. I'll now demo the creating equipment for manufacturing receipts and the setup that goes along with it. To turn on this option, you must go into the Service Setup window, which is located under Setup, Field Service, Service Setup, and you need to put a check mark in Create Equipment for Manufacturing Receipts, and this one is also for non-serialized tracked items to be created for manufacturing receipts as well. Since I've already marked the option in Service Setup, I needed to create a manufacturing order, which I've done so as well. Now I need to do my MO receipt to actually create my pieces of equipment. So under Manufacturing, I need to go Transactions, Manufacturing Orders, MO Receipt Entry. Now I can pull up my manufacturing order that I've already created, and I need to enter in my serial number since I am using a serialized item by clicking in this blue expansion arrow next to the receipt quantity. Here I can click on Auto Generate since I have my 100 XLG set up to auto generate serial numbers. Click OK. And now I can just click on Post. After clicking on Post in the Manufacturing Receipt Entry window, I can now look at my pieces of equipment that were created from this process. If I go to Cards, Service Call Management, Equipment, I can now enter in my serial numbers that I created from the MO receipt. I had written these down, and my item number, 100XLG. Notice my customer ID is Fab Return. That is my return customer ID that I have set up in Service Setup. A few other fields that were entered when the equipment record was created is the reference field now shows the manufacturing order that it was created from. The asset tag is filled in with the receipt number that was created from the manufacturing order, and also the ship and install dates were also entered as well. Now if we pull up the second piece of equipment that was created from that same manufacturing receipt, you will notice the same information being populated in those same fields. The remainder of the lessons are coming to modules specifically within field service. Lesson 6, Hotline Notes Top Down. This will now display the hotline notes from the top down on a service call. In previous versions, the hotline notes appended to the bottom, and you would need to scroll all the way to the bottom to actually view the latest note. I'll move over to Microsoft Dynamics GP and show you what this looks like on a service call. I'll show you what this looks like on a service call. If you go to Transactions, Service Call Management, Service Call, I'll pull up a service call that I've already entered notes on. Go into the Hotline button, and you'll see that I've actually entered notes previously, with the most recent one being at the top. Lesson 7, Ship to Address from Service Call Line. The address you select in the Shipping Address Override window determines the address for the ship to address for a purchase order or inventory transfer. You can select from Technician Site, Customer Address ID, Miscellaneous Address Code, or Transfer Header Modified. When you select Miscellaneous Address Code, the ship to address on the SOP invoice line will match the service call line shipping address. In previous versions of Microsoft Dynamics GP, the ship to address on the SOP invoice defaults from the address ID on the service call header. You must manually change the line on the invoice to match the address on the service call line. I'll now show you what this looks like on the service call parts line window. I have already entered in a service call, so if I go to Transactions, Service Call Management, Service Calls, I'll pull up a service call that I've already entered into the system, and if I go into the parts line window, you will see this yellow exclamation, and if I click on that, you'll see the address option of miscellaneous address code with the miscellaneous address of Delta Dash. If I drill back on this, you'll see this is my setup for my miscellaneous address. New to this window is a tax schedule ID. After I have entered the miscellaneous address code on the service call parts line, I have marked my service call as completed and ready to invoice, and now it's ready for billing. To bill the service call, I need to go under Transactions, Service Call Management, Service Call Billing. Notice here's my service call. I need to put a check mark in the box next to the M and click on Invoice. To view the invoice that was just created from the service call billing, I just need to close out of the window, print the audit trail report, and I'll see my invoice number. Now that I have the invoice number, I can pull it up in the Sales Transaction Entry window under Transactions, Sales Transaction Entry. Here's my invoice that was created from the service call billing. I want to highlight a line and expand the details, and I want to click on the blue expansion arrow next to the ship to address ID, and this will show me on a per line level what address is being used. Here you will see my Delta Dash, which was actually my miscellaneous address code that was set up on this service call parts line. Now under Contract Administration, we have Lesson 8, Contract Line Move with Open Service Call. This will allow you to move a contract line from one document to another for a contract line that is currently on an existing service call. The system will search for any open service call and update the call as needed. It will also accurately display the customer and the billing percentages on the service call to reflect the new contract information. The call will not be updated when the following situations are true. The service call is marked to post in the service call billing window. The entry date of the service call is prior to the move effective date, or the service call has already been invoiced. I'll show you what this process looks like in Microsoft Dynamics GP. I'll show you the service call that is tied to the first contract. If I go to Transactions, Service Call Management, Service Calls, I'll pull up my existing service call. And notice my equipment number, my item, and I have a contract number of 2069. I'll now pull up the contract that service call is tied to by going to Transactions, Contract Administration, Contract Entry Update. Now I'll enter in my contract number. Now if I go into Contract Lines, you will see that same piece of equipment that was entered on the service call. If I click OK, now I want to move that particular line to a new contract that I've already created that currently does not have any lines on it. I click on Move Lines. You'll notice that it populated information from the existing contract with the effective date of 5/1/2017. I also need to update my destination contract to the one that I created that does not have any information on it currently as far as a contract line. I can mark the option of none or remaining for the amount. And once I mark the option for this specific item number equipment combination, you'll notice that I get the message, open service calls may be affected by the new contract information when the move line is processed. You'll notice that the window populated information from the existing contract that I'm going to move the lines from. It has my effective date of 5/1/2017, and here's where I need to enter my destination contract that I've already entered in the system. That is required that it needs to be entered prior to actually moving lines. I can make the selection to none or remaining for the amounts, and as soon as I click the checkbox for item number, you'll see the message, open service calls may be affected by the new contract information when the move line is processed. I need to click OK on this message. And in order to move the lines, I actually need to click Post. I can just cancel through the report. And now I can go back and look at the service call to make sure that my contract is now updated again. I can close out of here, go under Transactions, Service Call Management, Service Calls, and I can pull up that original service call that I used, and now you'll see that it has the new contract information on the service call. Lesson 9, also under Contract Administration, Search by Contract and Revenue Recognition. This will allow you to select a single contract and display only the unposted revenue associated with that contract for the year and period selected. I'll show you what this looks like in Contract Administration. I'll now show you the Revenue Recognition window, which is located under Transactions, Contract Administration, Revenue Recognition. When pulling up the window, you'll now see the contract number search option. I just need to mark it and enter in my contract number. And once I tab off, it will restrict it to that specific contract and the fiscal periods that I want to recognize. If I want to change the fiscal periods, I can just select the drop down, go through period 12, and recognize all of these at once if I wanted to. The next lesson is from Contract Administration. Lesson 10, Consolidate Revenue Recognition. This will allow you to consolidate the journal entries into one GL entry in the lie-by batch, based on the grouping of the fiscal year and fiscal period. If you run revenue recognition for multiple contracts in one period, one journal entry creates in GL for the entire amount. If you run revenue recognition for multiple contracts in multiple periods, you'll receive one journal entry for each fiscal period. I'll now demo this feature in Microsoft Dynamics GP. Going back into the Revenue Recognition window under Transactions, Contract Administration, Revenue Recognition. In the Revenue Recognition window, I'm just going to select multiple contracts and click Post. And if I print the report, it will show me that there are two GL entries in the liability batch based on period 2 and 3. The last remaining lessons are from Returns Management. Lesson 11, RMA Line Level Lock. This allows multiple users to edit the same RMA. If you have two users edit an RMA and they both have the RMA set to hide details, only one user may create a new line. The first user who puts their cursor on the next empty row may create a new line. The other user will receive the message, "This document is edited by other user." If a row is being added to the end of the RMA, the other users cannot add a new row. They can only insert a new row. Lesson 12, RMA Return Quantity. This allows you to specify a return quantity type on an RMA when you receive the quantity. You may select a default return quantity type based on the RMA type. You may process a depot management work order or an RTV when you have received the RMA as a different quantity type. If the quantity type on the RMA is something other than on hand, this information will carry over to the work order or RTV. If the quantity type is not on hand, the document will not allocate a quantity. I'll show you this now in Microsoft Dynamics GP. I'll now pull up the RMA type under Cards, Returns Management, RMA Types. In the RMA Type Maintenance window, I'll pull up an RMA type of credit. And you'll notice on the right-hand side, the new field of Quantity Type has a drop-down arrow where you can select On-Hand, Returned, In Use, In Service, or Damaged. You can select one of these options per RMA type. I'll show you what this new option looks like in the RMA Receiving window by going to Transactions, Returns Management, RMA Receiving. Now I'd like to receive the RMA that I had previously entered with a return type of credit. I'll put a checkmark in the Mark to Post checkbox. And I have a return quantity of 5. I'll click on the blue expansion arrow next to Return Quantity. Within the RMA Return Quantities entry window, I am able to change my quantity type from on hand to returned, in use, in service, or damaged if I need to. Or if I want to receive all 5 with the same quantity type, I can do so here by clicking OK. At this point, to receive the item into inventory, I just need to go ahead and click on Post. And now the item has been received into inventory. For more options with the quantity types, I'm going to pull up the RMA that I just received against under Transactions, Returns Management, RMA Entry Update. Now I'll enter in my RMA number, and I'll expand the lines. And if I go into the Process button, you'll see here that I'm able to change the quantity type from on hand to any other option, even though I had previously set it up on the credit RMA type to be on hand. If I choose to select any other quantity type, I can select, for example, returned, and it'll ask me, do you want to change the quantity type from on hand to returned? I click yes. So now it will actually change all of my items to the returned quantity type. If I wanted to perform an inventory scrap of the item, the quantity type must be on hand. I'll show you this by going into Process, and if I select the drop-down for Process Type to Inventory Scrap, you'll notice that the quantity type must be on hand before you process a scrap transaction box appears. From this window, you can still create other process types. In the drop-down, you'll notice there's a Return to Vendor, Work Order Quote, or Work Order Open. In this window, I can select the process type of Return to Vendor, and the quantity type is not on hand, the RTV will still create. It will not allocate to the RTV, but the item is not on hand and is not part of inventory. Also in the window, I can select the process type of Work Order Quote or Work Order Open. If I selected one of these options and the quantity type of the item is not on hand, the work order will create. The item is not part of inventory and will not allocate to the work order. The work order entry update window will display the quantity type, and you may edit the field. If you change the quantity type on the work order, an inventory transfer posts to reflect the change. If you change the quantity type from any other type to on hand, the quantity will allocate to the work order. The work order will unallocate if the quantity type changes from on hand to something else. Also on the line of the item on the RMA, you'll see the Return to Stock button. The Return to Stock button will only allow lines with a quantity type of on hand to process. The transfer that creates from the return site to the main warehouse creates for the quantity value for the on hand quantity and not the returned quantity. You'll notice here being that the quantity type for this item that when it was received was returned. And the message that appears will be the quantity type must be on hand before you can return it to stock. Lesson 13. RMA SOP Consolidate. When you enter a cross-ship RMA with multiple lines, you will be able to consolidate those lines from the RMA to one sales order when you cross-ship them. The new SOP line appends to the existing SOP order with the same RMA number. This allows you to have multiple RMA lines on one sales order. If you use a replace RMA type, those lines will consolidate to an existing sales order with the same RMA number if you click Replace on the RMA line. This would occur if the RMA is received and the Auto Replace Receipts option is not marked in Return Setup. The Auto Replace Receipts option automatically creates the order in SOP during the RMA receiving process. In this situation, the RMA lines would not combine to one sales order. There is a new field that appears in the Return Setup window. You must mark the Consolidate SOP Order Document option to allow these cross-ship lines to consolidate onto one sales order. I'll now show you this in Microsoft Dynamics GP. To allow the consolidation to occur, there is a checkbox that needs to be marked in Service Setup. If you go to Setup, Field Service, Service Setup, and click on Return to go into the Return Setup, you must mark Consolidate SOP Order Document. To see the consolidation occur, I need to pull up an RMA transaction. If I go to Transactions, Returns Management, RMA Entry Update, and I'll pull up a transaction that I previously entered for a cross-ship. To create the sales orders for the cross-ship RMA type, I need to expand the lines and click on the infinity symbol next to the customer path of cross-ship. In this window, I need to click on cross-ship to create the sales order. Notice that it created an RMA sales order number that ended in 2006. If I go to my next line and click on the same infinity symbol next to the customer path for cross-ship, and if I click on cross-ship for my second item, you'll notice that it appends to the same sales order document that ends in 2006. Lesson 14. Item Description from RMA. When a SOP document is created from an RMA, it will display the item description from the RMA return item. I will now demo this feature in Microsoft Dynamics GP. I'll pull up an RMA that I have already entered under Transactions, Returns Management, RMA Entry Update. And if I expand the line that I have entered on the RMA, you'll notice I have a description of 128 meg SD RAM. From here, I can see the sales return document that was created when the RMA was received by going into the infinity symbol next to the customer path of credit. And I can see the credit document that was created that ends in 4005. I can drill back on this document and expand the lines on the sales return and see that my description came over of 128 meg SD RAM. You are still able to see what type of RMA that the sales return was created from by going into the blue expansion arrow next to the document number. From here, you'll be able to see in the GL reference field that it was a credit RMA and then the number of the RMA itself. This concludes the training for Microsoft Dynamics GP 2013 Field Service New Features. To recap, we went over new features in the general areas of field service, service call management, contract administration, and returns management. Thank you for taking the time out of your day to attend this Microsoft Dynamics GP training.